Corey Levin. I serve as Military Medical Innovation Director for the San Antonio Economic Development Corporation. And on behalf of the corporation, Velocity, Texas, and the city of San Antonio, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for your interest and attendance today. This is going to be the first of 3 panel discussions leading up to our Military Medical Industry Day meeting scheduled for April 19th. And these short midday panel discussions are intended to set the stage and really act as teasers for the larger meeting, which I hope you can all attend either in person or virtually. The other 2 events in this series will be held the last Mondays of February and March, and we hope those 2 events will be hybrid events with the option to attend either virtually or in person. They'll be hosted by Velocity, Texas at their downtown facility on Houston Street. The February 28th event is entitled Military Medical Needs, Requirements, and Funding, which is fairly self-explanatory. And the March 28th event is entitled Tales from the Field. And in that panel discussion, we hope to bring together some local entrepreneurs to share their stories of actually success in the field of commercializing products to address the needs of the military medical community. Dr. Scott Walter from the Air Force's 59th Medical Wing has assembled an outstanding panel for today's discussion on keys to collaborating with the military. And since y'all didn't sign up to hear me talk, and we only have an hour, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Walter so we can make the best use of everybody's time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. And thank you all for joining us. And thank you, the City of San Antonio, for sponsoring this and the Industry Day on the 19th of April that we hope all can attend in person. Provide a lot more interaction and activity and information. But wanted to take care of a few housekeeping. First, just a reminder that this session is being recorded, and that if you have any questions, please post them in the chat. We'll try to answer the questions at the end of the chat. At the end of today's discussion. But if not, we'll respond via email. Wanted to also make the disclaimer for all of our speakers that what we say and the opinions that we share today reflect those of our own and not necessarily those of the Department of Defense, the organizations that we work for, or the services that we support. We've assembled, as Dr. Corey Levinson indicated, a team of very experienced, knowledgeable individuals that bring in unique aspects and information that they can share. So I will quickly introduce the team and allow them to introduce themselves as we get started with the questions. So about 10 till we'll stop and start answering questions that are posted. First and foremost, ladies first, Ms. Colleen Gibney, could you please introduce yourself?
A pleasure to be here. I wish I could be there in person. I miss your bakeries and possibly your cocktail bars down there in San Antonio. But it's good to be here virtually. Colleen Gibney, I am up here in Fort Detrick, Maryland, in Frederick, and I am the Deputy Project Manager for the Medical Research and Material Command, Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer Office, commonly known as SBIR, STTR, or in the DoD, SBIR, and sometimes SITR, whether or not you like the way those are pronounced. We work primarily these days with the Defense Health Agency SBIR program and STTR program, which together comprises about $60 million a year. And we also do topics for the Army Futures Command's fundamental SBIR program, which funds projects that relate to what we call Army cross-functional teams under multi-domain operations. So these are the types of, we do SBIR funding. You may be familiar with SBIR.gov. And I can see that some SBIR folks like Biju Matthew are in the audience, and you can talk to them as well. But I'm here to also answer any questions about transition and commercialization, as well as how to work as a small business or a small enterprise with the government. And if you are the government, I'm here to help you work with small businesses better. Thank you for inviting me, Scott. Over.
Thank you. And for our audience, as a heads up, Colleen has already provided a considerable amount of information that'll be posted in the chat box. So do check out the chat box for additional information. Next up is we have Colonel Eric Weitzel. Sir, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
This is Colonel Eric Weitzel. I'm a otolaryngologist by training, and I'm the Chief of Operational Medicine for the 59th Medical Wing. I've been doing programmatic research and translational advanced development research for around a decade now. And in my current role, I'm trying to create models of study that would permit rapid translation of industry and corporate development into acquisition pathways for the military for products that we need by establishing austere models on our campus. And so the idea would be that we could serve as a medical proving ground for new technologies and get the new technology in the hands of personnel that would actually use it downrange. The idea here is that we would get those military investors and the corporate developers and the personnel, the end users, all in one place and have a nice synergy of activities. We're doing very well in that program. And we're ready to basically launch. We have all of our models established and working at this point. So I'm here to talk about perhaps the end user and integration of technology into acquisition pipelines. Over.
Thank you, sir. Next up, we have Mr. Chris Wilson.
Yeah, good afternoon or good morning for some folks, or I guess it's about noon for you guys there in San Antonio. But Chris Wilson here. I am the lead for the Biotechnologies and Human Interface Capability Focus Area at US SOCOM Science and Technology Directorate. So within that portfolio, we own pretty much anything that would fit into the biotechnologies category, human performance, and man-machine interface or human interface technologies. Or human factors technologies. Portfolio is roughly about $20 to $30 million a year, and we have anywhere from 20 to 30 active projects at any given time. We use a lot of SBIR and STTR, so we partner often with Colleen and their team, but we also have SBIR and STTR specific to SOCOM. And so I think that the broader science technology portfolio as well may be of interest to some of you. And we'll talk about how to access some of those requirements as well. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Chris. And we have Mr. Jim Meadows up next.
Last but not least, I'm a retired Army Medical Service Corps officer, spent 23 years in the Army doing operational medicine through hospitals to med center. Spent time in the Army Surgeon General's office as a program budget officer for DepMeds, and then went over to work in the Pentagon doing legislative affairs. I retired, went to the government relations career field in DC, worked that for a while, was able to get some legislative dollars for multiple programs. 2011, I spun off and started a company with a 51% ownership. My partner 49 in Panakia in 2011. We've been through a lot of product development and also marketing and distributing. So Scott asked me to join this illustrious group and hopefully share some of my experiences, some good, some not so good. So I'm here, and thanks for inviting me, Scott.
Thank you, sir. Alrighty, we're going to jump in to maximize everyone's time. I'll just jump into the first question, and it's for anyone on our panel. First question is, what distinction should be made about the different types of military collaborators for the individuals on the phone? Anyone chime in?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I was on mute. I think from our perspective in SOCOM, I mean, obviously one of those kind of unique collaborators, as we're an end user that kind of supports this type of work. And from our perspective, I think it's to become familiar with specific requirements or the unique capabilities of specific military entities. In our case, it's Special Operations Command. Obviously, some more highly trained medics than you would typically see across the rest of the military enterprise. A bigger focus on highly trained medics and less focus on physicians, and which is completely different than the most of the Department of Defense. And then, unique to SOCOM too is maybe a willingness to accept more risk than traditionally thought in medicine. So those kind of things are unique to collaborating with SOCOM that would be different should you engage with the Army, the Air Force, or the Navy. And then I think importantly, find out where each of these potential collaborators keeps their requirements. And I'm not talking specific requirements documents, but where do they have their research areas of interest? Where do they have their capability need statements that are in the open environment? In our case, they're on some of our websites that are open to the public. But that's the most important starting place, I think, for anybody, because you got to make sure that your technology is matched up with a need before you engage. I mean, that really saves kind of energy and time for both of us. That's where I'd start.
Scott, I'd like to jump in on that a little bit with
Please.
Chris. For Defense Health Agency, as Chris is reflecting, we are also looking at very, very far forward medicine, and particularly the combat medic in any service. But I also want to talk about, once you have an idea of those requirements or business areas or whichever you're going to go for, it's how some housekeeping around what do you do with that information? Because I know small businesses, you're moving quickly, you're on the ground, but I'm going to encourage you to be wildly innovative with your solution, but meticulous about your stakeholder tracking. And so here's one tip I'll give you. And what does this look like? If it's some of your project managers, it looks a little bit like a Project Management Institute stakeholder chart, an Excel chart that says, hey, who is the person? What is the office? What requirements, as Chris said, does that office represent? And what is their type of stakeholder? Do they have access to the funding? Are they a user representative? Can they help you to define the pull of the customer? Are they an evangelist for your technology? What is really their role? And here's my bonus tip. If they're a member of the military, I would like you to have a second contact in their office, because our folks do have permanent changes of station and move from office to office. So you don't want to call up and say, hey, wanted to check in. Oh my goodness, that person has moved to another role and I don't know who to talk to in their office now. I'd like you to have two. So I would, so stakeholders charts, and keep them up, talk about them with your team, have your team contribute to them. You cannot manage the people in your project too carefully. Over.
That's excellent. I think from both of y'all's answers, absolutely clear to be aware of your customer and the customer's needs and what capabilities. Maybe not try to be all to everyone, but definitely focus in on, because then I could really leads into our second question. What are some ways that innovators can find the best military collaborators for co-conducting medical research, development, and commercialization?
We have a program at 59th Medical Wing, BAMC, and the ISR that is called SCION, the Clinician Scientist Investigator Opportunity Network. It's a group of, we take faculty level surgeons, ER doctors, physicians, dentists, you name it, and they go through a 2-year fellowship on how to do programmatic research in the military and work with small businesses. This creates an ideal cadre of end users, physician end users that deploy, that can be tapped into for their expertise, both, hospital-based. So the commercial application for the product. I was going to answer the last question to say, you also want a rich commercial application for your product, not just a military application. And so these end users are ideal for finding that, establishing a commercial base for your product, as well as the deployed application. And they're the hybrid between the two that is a really ideal collaborator for the motivated small business. And the interesting thing is we try to diversify who's in this group of fellows, so that there's cardiologists, I'm an otolaryngologist, there's vascular surgeons, cardiothoracic surgeons, dentists, you name it. And so we can match you up to the person that's most appropriate for your line of effort. Over. And then Scott Walker can easily connect you. He's very aware of this program, so Walter can make the connections to this program.
Thank you, sir. And sorry, I jumped over question one. Anybody else? Any answers?
Scott, can you hear me? I
Please.
think I'm off mute.
Thanks, John.
Obviously there's been some transitions going on with DHA, and we're consolidating a lot of things. Going back to the first question, I think a lot of it, in my past experience, deals with the agility and the bureaucracy. of the organizations you're working with. For an example, the Marines, if you work in a medical requirement with the Marines through the Navy, they're much more agile to make things happen than the Army. The Army has a tendency to be a little more bureaucratic. It take 10 to 15 years to get a product moving if you have it in the system. Secondly, my experience looking at the requirements in the Marine Corps and the Army, an example, we worked a sterilization program a number of years ago. The Army was using the 2151 Big Bertha sterilizer, as was the Marine Corps. So we were in the process of getting money to develop a cold sterilization capability, and we brought the Marines and the Army together to help jointly develop the program. So working with SOCOM also, they're much more agile, I believe, because they have a smaller force that's able to make decisions quicker. So some of the things I've run into in the Army is, being a former Army guy, I understand the bureaucracy, but you have to be aware of that and then prepare for it.
I know agile is a good word. Sometimes people look at risk and think it's a 4-letter word and avoid it as much as the plague. But accepting the risk sounds like the right approach. And then knowing if you're working with an agile organization that's going to accept that risk, as Chris Wilson pointed out earlier. Any other answers or injects for questions 1 and 2? Because as we're talking about risk, the question 3 then pops up is, what are some of the mistakes or pitfalls that innovators should be aware of when reaching out to the military? We touched on that a little bit already.
I think, I mean, I'll take a stab at a couple that come to mind in kind of the experience we have often in medical device or therapeutic development. And I think it was Colonel Weitzel who discussed this earlier, and I know Colleen mentioned it, but commercialization in the medical industry, DoD or not, is absolutely critical. And it has to be part of your plan from day one. If a technology only has applicability to the military or only has applicability to SOCOM, it's likely not going to make it. Save a few very niche requirements, that I think people can probably figure out. It's just not. I mean, you're competing with big healthcare industry, and we've had many cases where technologies get bought by some big healthcare entity, and then they get stopped. I mean, the program gets stopped. You get bought by a big healthcare company, and they decide not to invest in that anymore, and then the DoD loses that capability. So I think virtually everybody, at least going into the advanced development space, will want to see a commercialization plan and some market research that shows commercial viability. And I think the other one is early engagement of the regulatory activities, be it, I mean, most likely it's going to be the FDA. So either the company itself has some early engagement, you hire the right consultants, you engage with DoD regulatory experts, the Army and the Office of, I think, Regulatory Activities has a big role in that. But, those two things are really the kind of the highest bars that medical technologies need to overcome, even to be used within the military. And I think those things are often overlooked early in the development process, only to fall behind later. So that's two of the biggest ones that I would focus on early. Once you've kind of found your capability and who might be interested, you need to start working on those other two.
Scott, can I add a third to Chris there?
No, yes, please.
So I completely agree on those two. And in fact, our transition program, which is headed by Miss Andrea Renner in our office, we definitely want to begin with the end in mind on those two areas. A third is manufacturability. If you are not inherently a manufacturer, but you're going to be producing something for manufacture, I would like you to get in with the manufacturers that can do it. And I would like to see US manufacturers, because I will tell you that the laws are changing very quickly. And even though you may be past my program and you think, oh, I could produce in other countries, it's going to be cheaper, I'm going to tell you that it's going to get complicated pretty soon. The laws are, for protection purposes, are trying to keep, if you're working with the Department of Defense, there are some countries that we really don't want things produced in if you are a cutting edge new technology. So just to protect yourself. Now, what's one great way to do that? I'd like you to work with your local manufacturing extension partnership center. They are paid for by your tax dollars through NIST, through your state, and through your, and sometimes a third is from the company when you become an actual manufacturer. But if you're a startup, they'll just talk to you. Every state has them. They're within 50 miles of every US citizen, including Puerto Rico and Alaska, I believe. And they all are under different names. So if you don't know how to find your NIST MEP center, we'll get a link up in the chat, but talk to somebody about how to find a niche manufacturer or two that can meet your needs, and preferably have had some work with those regulatory bodies that Chris is mentioning, which can, you always think FDA, but I have quite a few technologies that need EPA clearance as well. Over.
Oh, that's great input.
And I may want to add one thing,
Yes,
Scott.
please.
Looking at requirements, Chris kind of mentioned this earlier. You go out and start spending a lot of time and effort developing something, and the military doesn't really have a requirement for it. We see that quite a bit. And to follow on to what Colleen is saying, I see a lot of companies get into the R&D side of it with no plans to go to manufacturing. It's like, you got to plan that in the future. You got to plan to manufacture. I'm working with a company right now that's just constantly making changes to its product. And my point is, you need to get the 80% solution out there, then work on that other 20%. But you need to go to manufacturing. Otherwise, competition would catch you and go over you. And add one more thing, as far as US opportunities to build, you can look at hub zones. There are a bunch of hub zones around the country that give some opportunities for people to manufacture their products and have good support from the government.
Excellent. Well, if I don't mind, I'll go ahead and add, because a couple of people already mentioned regulatory as a risk and something to consider. I want to point out that if you're working with the military and you have some type of military contract, there are advantages working with the military to approach the FDA under Public Law 115-92, which grants the DoD contractors better access for either expedited reviews or the ability just to have an informal meeting versus at the beginning of the project, instead of trying to meet with the FDA in a pre-sub meeting at the end. So just throw that out there, since it's already been introduced, as far as things to consider, risk that can be mitigated. If not, we'll go ahead and then move on to the next question. And just to kind of orientate people around, what are some good forums to attend for identifying appropriate individuals and organizations that they can contact for either collaborating or working together or getting their technology from someone?
I mean, I'll jump. I think, I think events like this are perfect. A great place to start. I think you can probably have a bigger voice in a forum like this, as opposed to one of the larger conferences. But many DoD agencies do events like this. I think Defense Health Agency has industry days. I know USAMDA and MRDC at Fort Detrick have industry days, usually specific to certain technologies. Even at SOCOM, we have some industry days, not typically specifically for medical stuff, but in general. So I think that's a great place in a kind of a more small environment. But on the broader military medicine, I think MHSRS, which is typically in August of every year, is probably the biggest. If you have capabilities specific to special operations medicine, then we have an event called Special Operations Medicine Scientific Assembly. That's typically, I think this year it's end of June, July in Charlotte. Kind of bounces around that time frame, but it's more specific to SOCOM in that. But I think, there's plenty of conference opportunities. Those are probably the big ones in SOCOM, and I posted the link to some of our stuff below. But we also have an entity called SoftWorks, which is kind of a rapid development and prototyping venue that we often will post specific topics that we're interested in, and a great place for industry to engage with. So I think that there's probably more opportunities than you would have in time to engage in all of them, truthfully.
Great input. Ask anyone else?
Yeah, just to tag on to Chris again,
Please.
seems to be a habit of mine, sorry. Is I put up the link for the SOMA SOMSA, which is I think the April version of the meeting you were talking about. There's a couple of different special forces meetings that happen, but that one is real popular with our SBIR companies in the tactical combat casualty care kind of area. And we may actually be supporting it directly this year. We're not sure. That one is right now listed May 2 to 6 in Raleigh, but I know you mentioned one in Charlotte. For MHSRS, we will have SBIR presence. It has grown to about 200 SBIR companies at the MHSRS, so we try to accommodate that. And so what you can expect if you come to MHSRS this year is we will have a booth, probably with DHA, and our people will help you meet other folks. And even if you have an SBIR or an STTR from another agency, NIH, NSF, doesn't matter. We'll give you a little sticker you can put on your poster. We will introduce you to people. We have sort of a concierge service for SBIR companies. And then we do expect to have specific programming similar to this in topic, how particularly around how do you commercialize SBIR technologies without a program of record? And that's what we're working on for that. Oh, yes, and abstracts. If you are have a project that you think would be worthy of an abstract, maybe an SBIR phase 2 or something from some other funding source, you have about another week and a half to turn in that abstract to the MHSRS, and you may get a poster opportunity or even put on a panel. So I would definitely look into doing that if you're interested in traveling to, you know, the bottom of, well, it's actually the middle of Florida and the bottom of August this coming summer, but it's not as bad as it sounds and it's an amazing event.
That's great. Anyone else? Let me jump into the next question, and that is, what distinctions must be made between funded and unfunded collaborative efforts? And I think in terms of either sitters and sitters, contracts and creative, what are some of the pitfalls?
I don't know, I'll start, I guess.
Thank you, sir.
I mean, I don't know that I would call them pitfalls. I think there's just advantages and disadvantages, or opportunities maybe. I mean, we at SOCOM, we have the ability to enter into CRADAs with industry or academia directly. It literally can be done in about 2 days in my office. The signature on our side is Ms. Sanders, the director of S&T. So it's a very useful tool in rapidly engaging with industry. And I think in terms of CRADA, how we view them, it's really an opportunity to collaborate with industry. You can share as much of your IP as you wish. And then typically what SOCOM provides is access to our forces, our operators, their opinions, their requirements. We use it sometimes to rapidly assess technologies if vendors have an interest in engaging with SOCOM in that way, where money doesn't have to change hands. And so you could share a technology either physically or virtually and then get immediate feedback. I think that's the great way to go about a CRADA, and it protects the ability to have future contractual arrangements as well. So it doesn't, put you in a ground that may jeopardize source selection in the future. In terms of we have a wide array of agreements and contracts capabilities within SOCOM. We do other transactions agreements. So that's like non-FAR-based contract agreements, if you will, for those maybe an industry that don't kind of have the financial structure of those typical defense contractors. And then we use MRDC or USAMRA, other contracting offices that have those same capabilities. I think they're all tools. I will say in SOCOM, we typically try not to do grants anymore. We used to do a fair amount of grants, but I think for us, contracts let us control the deliverables a little bit better, and that's just how we choose to do business. But I mean, we do contracts with industry and academia and small businesses, and partnerships of all those all the time. And so I think that's really the distinction for us, but we're flexible and we can use any of those tools.
Oh, that's great. ask the rest of the panel. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm trying to discern the question funded and unfunded. Obviously, you wouldn't want to get in a program that's unfunded unless there is a requirement. So many times you have requirements out there that are unfunded. We call them UFRDs, unfunded requirements. Not totally understand the question, but obviously getting to a program that's not funded would probably not be a good thing.
Roger that. I think in reference to CRADAs, which the military can allocate support for, but cannot allocate funding. So cooperative research and development agreement.
Perhaps I can talk about that
Yes, please.
a little bit, because in the inception stage of science, where we might see, let's say we're working with a software company that wants to deliver a product that can help us identify trends in patient care. And they're searching the marketplace to see if the military would be a potential part of their commercialization strategy. This could be an unfunded sort of interest, and they might go to like an end user, like a research end user like myself, and say, hey, are there any grants available or SBIRs out there that we could develop this technology for you as an end user that might, hit a point where the military might want to buy that from us at some point. And so at which point then I would work with my program managers, and we would start scouring grant calls. And you'd be surprised at how often, if something makes sense, there's a requirement for it. You just have to be clever enough to look at the calls correctly. So perhaps we do things a little bit reversed, but usually if there's a good idea, there's almost always a grant out there. And so almost I can't even think of the last time where a company came to us and we said, yeah, we'll start working with you and identify a grant or some mechanism. For instance, end of year funds often drop that we can find ways to study products utility in the military. And then this can often give the company pilot data as to whether or not there's a good use case for their product within the military environment. Over.
Appreciate that. Well, let me ask a follow-up question then. With agreements like CRADAs and other cooperative research that doesn't necessarily come with funding, would that lend credibility to someone's program that they could use to take to, say, angel investors, capital investments, other larger companies, and show that there's interest in some of their ideas or technologies? I'll put that out for the group.
I mean, Scott, I absolutely think so. Several of the folks that we engage with CRADAs with, then they seek like venture capital funding or something along those lines. And then I think that rolls naturally into something like an OTA or other transaction agreement where there's an expectation of some investment from the company itself and the government to develop a product together. And I think that's where the venture capital on that side comes in, compiled with the government funding. I think it absolutely does. And kind of the scope of that work plan that comes with that CRADA defines the output. And that's easily scalable or definable by the two parties engaging in it.
So in a sense, a package would be stronger with stronger collaboration. I mean, that just makes sense, but actually to state it and for them to hear it, I think helps. So that's some great input. Anyone else? Because then,
Scott, if I could just mention one caveat to CRADAs.
yes, please.
If you have an SBIR or an STTR, and your government person may not know this, you may not need a CRADA because the government can work with you directly because you have already satisfied the competition piece. However, the government may need a CRADA on their side because they may need to codify the fact that they're going to do work on the government side and they need to put something in the timesheets. Okay, that's fine. So if you're in that situation, I encourage small businesses to have that CRADA checked by the contracting officer who signed your SBIR, because some of our CRADA language contradicts some of our SBIR language. And you don't want to get into discussions later about which supersedes which. The answer will be the SBIR because it is coded in federal law, but you don't want to go there. You want to have it modified so that you are not in this kind of waiting for someone to make a modification. So if you have questions about that, how to work CRADAs versus SBIRs, you have an SBIR, someone needs to put a CRADA, give me a call. We've been through that a million times. It's usually one line, but we'd like that one line to be off early rather than later.
That is great information. Thank you. With the remaining time to hit the last few questions, what websites and sources are out there for innovators to access for information about military medical research and development programs, requirements, and funding? And I know this is a topic will be hit next month with the other one, the funding aspect, but I'll just throw it out there for the group.
I mean, I think if you look in the chat box for the last 20 minutes, you'll probably find, you'll find certainly everyone that I wrote down on my notes here. I think the only one maybe that's not on there is grants.gov. I mean, if if you're looking for kind of a competitive, more big industry, the broad agency announcements that a lot of big DoD R&D uses, that's really where all those reside. I mean, I've been copying and pasting things that people post out here for my own references in the future. So I think that's a phenomenal resource right there. I don't know if you could put it on one Word document and send it to everybody, but I'd start there and then branch out from that.
I think we will, thanks to that. And even though that's a mic drop, ask anyone else from the group if they have any other inputs. I'll briefly mention that what's kind of surprised to a lot of people is that some of our military generate patents that the military supports and are available for licensing, that usually because it's medical, a patent then usually represents almost an immediate medical need. And so those patents are out there if small companies or anyone really wants to license it. And the place to start would probably be the checkout tech link. They have the vast database of patents that are available for licensing or interfacing with the researcher themselves. Colonel Weitzel, very proud to report, he has multiple patents already in the wings that we're supporting. So I don't know if you want to use that as a sounding board.
I mean, we've been fortunate to, I have a rich collaborative network of physicians and scientists that I work with on a daily basis. And so when we see like a briefing from, say, NASA, or when we see a briefing from some sort of field event and we look at like after action reports and we're like, wow, we really need to develop a product that can do XX. And then enough of us have this, kind of the civilian sort of, wherewithal or situational awareness to know that we're also going to need a product that has civilian relevances too. So there's commercialization potential, not just for this niche sort of aspect of some super exotic, space application or field application, but also we would use it in the hospitals. And so we make sure that if we're developing IP, it's tailored to a broad representation of end user need. So I guess, for the 5 or 6 patents that I've worked on and the ones that we've been helping to generate through other SMEs around us, we give them that same advice. And the hope is that some commercial entity would come along, license that patent, and then start thinking about manufacturing it for a broad array of applications that we can then leverage it as a product when it's produced. So yeah, Scott's right on there, and of course our motivation is to eventually get a product that we can buy back from you, but hopefully at a reasonable cost because you're selling so much of it. Over.
And making a lot of money.
Oh, so
Yes,
I
ma'am.
just wanted to piggyback on that for you because I know you won't always sing your own praises, but the technology transfer community in the DoD is so wonderful and friendly to work with. And you have someone like Dr. Walter at the 59th. You've got someone like Barry Dotloff at the MRDC Tech Transfer, Medical Technology Transfer Office. A lot of these assets will be put together under the DHA in some ways or connected, as we're talking about TechLink. But as Colonel Weitzel mentioned, NASA also has IP in the medical domain that you can tech transfer. But when you go to your local tech transfer expert, they know where to reach out to get these pieces. So if you're a small business, you might be thinking, well, I have my own stuff. Well, sometimes the things we need have a couple of expertise domains. And you may have this domain, you may be a cardiology expert, but you may not be an expert on the other part of the project. So look to some of these assets because they are sometimes diamonds in the rough. And we have folks who really are motivated to help you find a business relationship and a way to integrate that with your project. So I just want to speak up for it. I've just met so many impressive people in these offices and they're just lovely to work with. Over.
Thank you.
You mentioned NASA, also DARPA has money out there too. Defense
Yes,
Research Project.
DARPA for sure. Yes. All of them. You never know, medical and medically related. That's why when I put up the SBIR link, it's not a DHA only link. It's good to look at everything. I have seen medical topics under the Defense Logistics Agency that I consider medical, because maybe it has to do with medlog kind of processes. You have to look everywhere. You have to use your keyword search and you have to do a little tech scouting in reverse. It's like market intelligence into these grants. How can my solution, address the need that they're talking about? But boy, in the SBIR community, we talk throughout the agencies a lot. And let me mention really quickly that if you do have an SBIR in another agency like NSF or NASA that you think could be adapted to medical, maybe it's oxygen generation or sterilization, as Jim was saying, did you know we can adopt that in another program, that these programs are transferable? So if you have something you think would be really hot for DHA that you have had funded by the NIH, I want to hear about it because if we have an asset and we have a buyer, we may be able to extend your program. Can't promise, but we'll look at it. Over.
Well, that's just invaluable information y'all are providing. Anyone else want to chime in on that? Well, the next question is items that we probably already covered, but just to stimulate any additional conversation. What are some resources that we can provide or that they can go to find out more information about military innovation, military research? What can military needs and requirements? Just for those innovators just starting out.
One thing that I've found is that it depends really on what you're trying to innovate. One difficult area that I think there's a big need is like educational tools and educational products. And there is not the robust funding sort of line for these tools that you would hope would be out there for organizations that are so focused on training. And so that all comes down to like finding the right people and partnering early on with experienced personnel that kind of have been through the system. That I think Scott Walter as a belly button, like we've already heard, he's an amazing guy, really easy to work with, just friendly and really is just out to promote the betterment of the military mission. And then he can get you to the right end user that can start guiding you through that process. But there are areas which are notoriously difficult to get some momentum going behind you, and I've found specifically like education, some of these like virtual reality sort of products that we want to see adopted. We're struggling a little bit there, but I think the momentum is building, but it just depends is the answer.
Roger that. I can almost make that leap of faith that sometimes industry may start using a new technology, a new innovation, and it might take the military a little bit longer to implement that. So we might need some help in that area. As far as awareness, maybe tailoring to some of our military unique needs. And when I say military unique, it being that some of our equipment has to survive more austere locations, the drop tests, 4 feet, that sort of. So I ask anyone else from the panel want to chime in on that? All righty. Well,
I think,
Right.
Scott, I mean, I think, you know, what I noted there is, you know, seek partners, collaborators, and consultants that are familiar with working with the military. I think that's key. There's a ton of them out there. Many of them I think are on this call. But it's a different environment to navigate, and really hard if you're just coming from industry into it cold. And I think the other thing is, you know, be patient, but listen to feedback. I mean, we have industry engagements all the time, and we try to provide feedback, and often we kind of get the same technology right back at us. And you know, I mean, it's a little bit frustrating when you're on our side to keep you know, people keep bringing the same technology in 5 different avenues. So take that feedback and you know, modify maybe your approach or your technology. But definitely be patient too, because it can be you know, a long haul.
Roger that. Any other inputs in regards to other resources to check? Well, I know one of the concerns sometimes is when they're engaging the military, there's some concerns about patentable intellectual property, and we already touched on that briefly, intellectual property, IP, and securing it. What should they know or be concerned about when they engage the military and military civilian researchers?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think part of that's a big legal question and well above my pay grade. I think for us, how we go about it in our program and our portfolio in protecting IP for industry or academia is the broad use of non-disclosure agreements. I mean, essentially everybody who works in my portfolio has signed a general non-disclosure agreement on everything that we review. If we're working with a specific partner who wants something more specific, we're willing to do that as well. I think that's something we're very comfortable with. I mean, I'm completely confident that the government is not out to steal IP from industry. I understand the industry may have some reservation about that, and we've experienced that. But I think, I mean, there are plenty of things out there that protect IP, and there are, I mean, but when you're working with the government, there's always going to be some government purpose rights as well. And those are the things where I think lawyers, and Colleen probably most certainly knows more than I do. But it's part of doing business with the government. There's got to be a little give and take, I think, on that side.
Roger.
Adding to Chris, it's complicated, but what I would say, I wouldn't invest a lot in this if you don't have a technology that's going to be part of a program of record or is going to be in a big funded area for us. But if you get to that world and you're saying, oh gosh, I've got a product manager interested, then that's when you want to go to your IP attorney, which is not the attorney you pay for normal things in your business. Your IP attorney has domain expertise and costs a whole lot more. So you do not want them doing simple things for your office. They cost a lot. And you want to go to that person and say, are you familiar with government law and also SBIR and how we should be looking at our SBIR assets as part of our, not the same as patents, but as assets within our intellectual property portfolio? Do you understand how this works and how we can adequately mark and do this as we move forward so that we ensure that government purpose rights are harmonious? But here's where the government can't help you and you have to help yourself. If you are in a subcontract with a major prime vendor, okay, we count that as phase 3 and we follow on and we'll protect your rights, but you have to get that put into your legal language. And once in a while, the large prime is going to push back on that. And even though they don't know, in some cases, it is actually in their own interest to do it, but that relationship we do not have primacy with. So we can't go to them and say, oh, you have to put this language in. Now, do we try to convince people it's a good idea? We do. But that's something you have to be prepared to fight that battle if you're going into a good prime sub relationship. Over.
Roger that. Well, look, thank you. That's great advice and information. I was going to mention that government, civilians, and military are bound by the Trade Secrets Act.
Mhm.
So we're already held accountable to, in a sense, a higher authority. But also wanted to foot stomp that the most critical point is if you have proprietary information, make sure it's marked appropriately. Don't just mark everything, and don't forget to mark anything, but mark what truly is, and it'll be protected for various reasons. Well, I think we're on the 10 minutes before the hour, and so we want to go ahead and transition to taking questions from our audience. So Caitlin, what do you have for us?
I've got a few questions here for you from the chat. The first one is, will there be an opportunity for vendors to display their products during the April 19th Military Medical Industry Day?
Corey, do you want to take that one? I know it's been something that's been worked.
Yeah, the answer to that is yes. And if you're interested in that, please send me an email. I put my email address in the chat there. It's just Corey@saedc.org. And this is a good time to reach out because a number of vendors have contacted us about space, and we're trying to figure out everybody's requirements and address them. So please contact me if you're interested in that. Over.
Roger, this is Scott. A quick follow-on question. Will there be any projected costs for bringing a technology or having a display or a booth? Or is it too early to tell?
I think it depends on what the requirements are. If people just need a table where they can set up pamphlets and talk to people, and we can do that in the lobby, that's one thing. I mean, if they're coming with a whole 10 by 10 booth display where they have power requirements, and it depends really on who the vendor is and what their expectations are, I think. So we need to sort of look at what the needs are, and then we can follow up with people and make sure that we can provide what they need. Over.
Thank you. I must point out the previous 2 industry days that San Antonio has held, this wasn't an option. It was much more focused. So appreciate the broader perspective and providing additional capabilities. So Caitlin, next question.
This is kind of a follow-on to the previous one, which is, what are the requirements to present your technologies at MMID?
Well, again, I mean, if it's about a vendor, you can reach out to me, and again, if you can also reach out to me if what you have in mind is getting involved in the meeting as a panel participant or a speaker, or in some other way getting involved in the science side of things. So you can either reach out to myself or Scott Walter, but I think I'm the point of contact here, and makes life easier if we just have one email address and I can triage things to the appropriate people. So again, I'll put my email address in the chat again so everybody has it. It's quite simple. It's just my first name, COREY@SAEDC.org. Over.
Thank you.
All right. Next question here. Does regenerative medicine remain an area of focus for MRDC, CDMRP, and/or DHA?
Sounds like I got to try that one, Scott, huh? Sorry. This question is near and dear to our hearts because at the DHA SBIR program, we funded a huge amount of regenerative medicine a few years ago. What I will say is that funding cycles are cyclical when it comes to certain types of technologies, and that regenerative medicine is still very important. For the CDMRP, I think you should just keep watching because the Congress determines what the subjects are for CDMRP funding. So, but they don't have the formal AFRMS program that they had previously. That was a particular program with universities to develop regenerative medicine. I think I can say to a general audience that as priorities have shifted, and Chris was talking earlier about the medic and making sure that our work is very, very far forward. I think since we have such limited assets in the medical product development community, that some of the shifts had to go to more near term and medium term. And one thing you see about regenerative is it is a little farther term. However, what I would do if I was looking at regenerative medicine right now, and I didn't see the topics I wanted, but I had something very compelling that was absolutely new in the science, not just new to the DoD, new in the science and the and to apply it, I would try to fund that through an NIH open SBIR. You don't have to have a topic there. You just file to the center that is the most clear. They have 3 times a year, they have these omnibus solicitations. If you get a phase 1 and a phase 2 in a regenerative medicine area that's becoming reduced to practice, okay, and you think, gosh, this has a military interest, this is something that's going to help, then do send it to our office once you have the phase 2. And I will find out, because again, I think these things are cyclical and will change a little bit. As regenerative medicine products get farther and farther along, they become closer to commercialization and closer to what the DoD could look at as a near-term or mid-term program. So don't give up on that, but I don't think we're going to start becoming a major funder of what we funded a few years ago. And some of those programs are still rolling. But I do want to say that you should keep an eye on, and I didn't put this link in here, ARMI, which is the, I can look up the link, but this is in Manchester, New Hampshire, and it is a consortium for regenerative manufacturing. It's extremely friendly to small businesses, and they have conferences in the fall. I believe they have a conference coming up in the winter. And boy, that is where some of the energy around medical regenerative, all the people who used to do it in some areas, some of those same experts are putting their energy there. I know it's a little bit later stage because we're talking about regenerative manufacturing and not the early stage R&D. So this is a puzzle, this is a mosaic. We have to put it together, but we know regenerative is important. It's just hard to fund. I hope that's helpful.
Oh, that's a great answer. Thank you.
If I may, Scott,
Yes, please.
this question brings up a little bit of an issue that we've seen in the past. You get money for a program like regenerative medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Then you start going down that lane, then all of a sudden the money dries up. Where do you go from here? As a former legislative affairs guy in working for the Director of the Army budget, following on as a government relations guy, following on as a lobbyist, I think it's always good to know who your congressmen and your senators are and just stay in touch with that office, because when you get congressionally directed funds, it comes from Congress. So, you need to be on Capitol Hill blowing your horn, touting your technology with them and keep them in the loop. Because when the House and Senate Appropriations Committee come together, you want to have your member of Congress supporting what it is you're doing. As long as it's a requirement and the military wants it. It's hard to get money out there, and it's not a program that the military wants. I just throw that out on top of that.
That's great. Thank you. Caitlin, I think we have time for one more question.
And we have one final question that came in through the chat, which is, can the panelists comment on tips for transitioning from R&D funding to advanced development funding?
Yes, we can.
I think from our perspective, this is probably how Scott and I met a few years back in this exact topic, right? So my portfolio is by and large 6263 budget activity, R&D, and virtually every one of my programs needs to transition to advanced development. And I think from our perspective, I view that more as my role as a government R&D PM than the industry partner itself. Now we partner it together, but it's really my job to show to the advanced developers that this technology may meet a larger requirement for DoD, hopefully for the joint DoD, right? More than just SOCOM. And then we partner with, in the case of Scott and I a few years back, it was Air Force Advanced Development. Now my primary advanced developer is the Defense Health Agency. And that's really my job as a PM, to find other joint partners and then find the advanced development funding to continue that activity. In my experience, it almost never comes from the industry forcing that activity. It has to be a DoD avenue, and industry is just a partner. And we may ask you to brief your technology to that group, but I view that as a an R&D PM's job to try to sell that to the advanced developers, really. And it's what we do, almost every month. I'm working that directly with the Defense Health Agency or the Army or the Air Force.
Amen.
Scott, if I could just add to that, and I completely agree. in the SBIR and STTR community, I'm going to take responsibility for the whole community now because there's a whole lot of different players. We sometimes use language like about this kind of sloppily, to be honest with you. We have put a lot of pressure in some programs on you to transition. Prove to me that you have transitioned this technology and we will get you more funding. We've made it seem like that verb is your responsibility. And I think it's just there's so much interest in making sure that companies stay engaged and they're in the mission. But I agree that it's the pull of the customer that makes that determination. That said, as we reflected earlier, when you do get somewhere and you're starting to cross the line, because I've had quite a few projects cross to the 6-4 line, but they die because under acquisition, they have to be fully funded for the program years ahead, or they have to get killed. And so they get killed there, not because of anything wrong with the tech, but this is a small, just not enough money to be sure we can do it. So I think you want to keep in mind that commercial partnership, because without giving away, things I've heard in rooms, it is not uncommon to hear, well, how do we sustain this capability? This is just a smaller company. How do we know that they can keep going? Where's the evidence of their other commercial partnerships? Now I can wave my SBIR sign in that room and I can say, hey, they're an SBIR, they're small and they're doing their best and they're not on, they don't have to do cost sharing at this point. This is, does not matter. What people want is a reduction in risk. Product managers are taught to drive down risk. And you can drive down risk by pushing for commercial partnerships. And here's one other thing I'll add about commercial partnerships. Sometimes you have to develop for the commercial partner first and us second. And that goes against what you think. We just told you don't use Wi-Fi, regular Wi-Fi, and don't make that device white because we don't want white in the field. It'd get blown up. Well, your corporate partners may want white and Wi-Fi, and you can change the rest later. So I would say make it white, go to Wi-Fi, do what you need to do to get a first customer, even if it's like a minimum viable product, right? You know that term. So do that, get the commercial partner, and that is the best way that if you do cross that bridge, they'll go, oh, well, they're working with these guys, they've got a contract, so maybe they got something there. And if you know anything about investors, every part of the investment range, they like other investors to come in first. I don't care if you're angel, venture, government, everyone likes to never be the first partner.
Well, that's great advice. I think we're going to have to wrap it up, but that was perfect. I think what you heard there was commercial, commercial, commercial. I would also add having an end user who says, I want this, I will procure it. If it's successful, I will use it. I will write policy on it. So keep that in mind too, because I always see in the valley of death, if you have somebody on the other side, an end user who throws you a rope, they'll pull your project through. But in closing, I wanted to thank everyone for attending today. Thank the City of San Antonio for sponsoring this. The 2 more webinars that we have planned in February and March, make sure you sign up for those. And of course, the Industry Day planned for the 19th of April. I want to thank our panel members who brought such outstanding information and support and sacrifice of their time to help guide the future. I also wanted to wish Ms. Colleen Gibney a very happy birthday. Tomorrow's her birthday, so
Thank you.
and thank you all. And don't forget, tune in on the 28th of February, requirements up on the board, and Dr. Celine Cardan will be in the middle of that one. Thank you all. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Scott. Happy birthday, Colleen.
Thank you.